transfer data or engage in any communication without it being leaked is an important aspect. And the second thing is in terms of the ability for it to be valid, as in not getting changed along the way. Man in the middle and the like.
Yeah, so integrity, authentication, confidentiality type of things. You wanna? Yeah?
Confidentiality, integrity of data, maintaining that, so that's very important for sensitive data, especially like credit card information.
Okay, yeah. Anybody else? I see there a hand. I'm just going to run around and see, make this a little bit interactive.
Every bits and bytes of data in this digitized world which is flowing across the internet, we have to protect that.
Every bit and byte needs to be protected. Anybody else? Yeah, somebody there. Don't be shy, there are no wrong answers.
The availability of the service, it should be available and online, especially the banking and financial services.
Good. Availability specifically of critical services for the society. And this is interesting. It goes from one extreme of to the other extreme. This is keeping me fit today.
Thank you very much. I think like intellectual properties, we all have a certain boundaries. For example, talking about India, like India has boundaries with Pakistan, Nepal and Bangladesh and all those other countries, same like Afghanistan and any other country. I think the same we have a territory in the cyberspace as well. Though that's virtual, but we do exist somewhere in that cyberspace. Now, by cybersecurity, we mean whatever virtually happens in the world and which gets us connected, whether that's telecom services, whether that's data services, whether that's any other services which is actually not tangible. And we do transact them from one place to another place. So protecting that property, that virtual property or cyberspace property, is what we call cybersecurity.
So that one I find hard to capture, but a sense of sovereignty in cyberspace is what I hear. So a sense of citizenry, how would you say? Citizenry. Is that a word? No, I don't think so. The sense of being a citizen in citizenship. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you, all of you. I'm not a native speaker, and I'm sure most of you are not a native speaker of English. So we sometimes struggle with the language. So that's an interesting one. Citizenship or sovereignty, legal recourse, I guess, within cyberspace. How does that work? So I already heard 3 different layers of approaches to cybersecurity. 3 different layers that I tend to think are important layers as well. First, there is the confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity of data. Data in storage, data in processing, and data in flight, in communication. Those are very important aspects of cybersecurity. And the way that data is processed, the technical cybersecurity, so to speak, is important too. And usually people talk about that in terms of InfoSec, information security. Making sure that when data is being processed, it is being processed in predictable and well understood ways. This is where software security comes in, for instance. Making safe and reliable software and safe and reliable products. Another thing that I think I heard was indeed that citizenship. That's approaching, and critical infrastructures over there. That is approaching cybersecurity from a completely different perspective. That is approaching cybersecurity from a societal angle. What is important for the society? What is the impact of InfoSec gone wrong, so to speak, or InfoSec problems on our environment? What is the problem if there is a bug in a banking system? What is the problem if there is an InfoSec attack on the banking system, if exploits are being exploited? bugs are being exploited in the critical infrastructure system. What is the impact of a criminal in one jurisdiction committing crime using the internet, using the global connectivity that the internet brings on somebody else? Those two different type of mindsets, in my opinion and my experience, talk a completely different language. The InfoSec community talks about bits and bytes. So who of you have heard of, say, NDSS or one person? So NDSS is one of the conferences that the Internet Society is affiliated with. It's a community of system and network engineers with security mindset. And it's a conference that is organized once every year, February in San Diego, and it's one of the top conferences. The papers that are presented there, by the way, are all available in open format, so you can download them from the NDSS website. The papers that are discussed there are about buffer overflows, they are about user interface issues, they are about side channel attacks. Who of you just understood the words that I was using? Buffer overflow, side channel effect. Half of you. That's InfoSec language, people. That is the language that the technologists in this space speak. Now, critical infrastructure, sovereignty, law enforcement exchange, these are words that are usually better understood by all of the people in the room. But that's because they're about sociological and social issues. As you know, as you probably see, I'm improvising a little bit on finding a path in this conversation. So, I think it is very important that those two languages are connected. I think it's very important, and I think that is the role of bringing technologists, people who just raised their hands when I said buffer overflow, bringing them together with the people who think about policies. Because these two things are tightly interrelated. The people who have to make the decisions about investments in InfoSec security, in pure hard work, often don't understand the words that come with the pure hard work of preventing buffer overflow, preventing side channel effects. Huh? That is an important issue. That's why you are all here. And this is also something that we try to do at the Internet Society. Try to bridge why certain pieces of work are actually very important for the trust and stability of the internet as a system. Let me give you a few examples, at least two. And let me start off with the idea of nation states and critical infrastructure. And it comes back to conversations about multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism as well. One of the things that I'm involved in, became involved in, is what is called the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. That's a committee that came out of a long process. What is the case? Countries have already for some years understood that cyberspace is a place is a battleground. Cyberspace can be used to disrupt a nation state for offensive purposes. We've seen examples of this. We've seen nation states using InfoSec technology, InfoSec capabilities, cyber capabilities to attack targets in other states. The centrifuge example in Iran is one, which, yeah, Stuxnet is so what happened, and this is not really well attributed, but what basically happened is there was a centrifuge, a nuclear centrifuge in Iran, and a nation state jet lag. Most likely a nation state infiltrated a software bug in there, in the digital control systems that control these centrifuges, so that they spun out of control and blew themselves up. This was industrial automation systems that basically, you know, have sensors and actuators, and they basically looked at how fast these things spin, and this bug, which was exploited, basically removed the limits on the amount of spin these centrifuges could do, and then they blew up, which put the nuclear program of Iran way back. The problem with this was that once a weapon like this, so a virus or a piece of malware that is implanted in this industrial system, has been found, it can be reused. And what happened is that that piece of malware was picked up, reused in some way, and ended up as Stuxnets infecting various machineries all over the planet, actually. Anyway, these are examples of military use of ICT vulnerabilities. And so there has been, over the time, at the highest level, been discussions about how do we make sure that if somebody uses cyber as a weapon, this doesn't escalate into throwing kinetic or even worse weapons towards each other. This is the type of thing that happens in the cellar of the UN in Geneva, where previously the SALT Accords, you know, nuclear arms confidence building measures were negotiated and so on and so forth. And the same type of people, the same groups of people now talk about how do we build confidence building measures so that we don't get these escalations? How do we create an understanding about what is allowed and what is not allowed in cyber warfare or in actions between states? These conversations have been going on in the UNGGE, the UN Governable Group of Experts, and they came to a few conclusions over their meetings, like CSIRTs should not be targets. CSIRTs should not be targets of offensive cyber attacks. It's essentially protect the hospitals. It's the same type of rule. Did anybody know that CSIRTs are actually protected under agreed norms by the UN? This is an agreed norm by the UN. You don't attack CSIRTs. That's actually a good thing. In 2013, 2015, the UN also agreed, the GGE also agreed that human right, the Charter of the UN and human rights apply, international law and the Charter of the UN applies to cyberspace. Also a good thing. However, in 2017, when the same group joined again of governmental experts discussing how international law would apply to cyberspace, they didn't get to a conclusion. And that all had to do with the rights of strike back and self-defense and so on and so forth. They could not get to a conclusion. So the multi-state, the multilateral discussions around cybersecurity failed. how to get out of this conundrum. Because if you look at cyberspace, it is very special. In classic warfare, in classic interstate conflict, it's all about the state being offensive and the state being defensive. It's about armies to each other. But in new types of conflicts, it's offense by state actors, and the defense is actually almost all in the hands of the private sector. The people who run the networks, the people who run the systems, the people who build the wires.
Wouldn't the same thing of non-state actors in traditional war setting apply here?
Yeah, there are non-state actors in there. There are always there. It's not as black and white as I say. I grant you that. That's true. But anyway, how to get to a set of norms that are actually carried by everybody who needs to implement them, and that is also carried by the nation states, who in the end will need to implement this in the very end as international law. That's the big question. So this is when the Dutch government and some other governments, Singaporean I believe, came around and basically said, let's start a commission. Let's start a commission of people with different backgrounds, a true multi-stakeholder commission that informs the broader community of their ideas and gets input from the broader community on their ideas on norms for stability in cyberspace. Stability in cyberspace meaning de-escalation and making sure that everybody understands what you do and what you don't do in cyber warfare or interstate behavior. That commission is chaired by Marina Kaljurand of Estonia. Estonia was mentioned earlier, and Lata Radi, who probably many of you know. She was an undersecretary here before, I believe.
Deputy National Secretary.
And Michael Chertoff, who is an old security secretary in the US. And it has people from the tech community. I myself self-identify with the tech community. Bill Woodcock, some of you might know him, is part of the commission. Civil society, Henriette Esterhuizer and Samir Sami, I believe his name is, from the yeah, right. Yeah, Samir Saran, right. He's also civil society. So two people from India. I would say the global south, east, west, north, all the quadrants are involved in the commission. And what we did in the commission, and then I'll show you a slide, is we came up with a norm, which is the call to protect the public core of the internet. Now I'm going to get my laptop. This is how I ended up here. I have a little appliance that I need. One sec. No, it's not that appliance. I thought I had it here, but... My apologies.
Full of appliances.
Yeah, my bag is full of appliances. It's a bit of a... This is the little appliance that I need. This is what you get when you have an Apple computer. They used to come with all kinds of nice ports and so on and so forth, but nowadays it's all no ports. So let's see. Too much going on my screen. But this is the one that I wanted to show you. One sec. This is the one that I want to show you. This is the call to protect the public core. Mind you, this is the outcome of a committee of 24 random people with some background in technology, civil society, international law, some ex-foreign ministers. There's even an ex-spy on the panel. You can look it up. He's been head of station somewhere. It says on his bio. But the point of this is that this is the input of a lot of people thinking about this problem. Without prejudice to their rights and obligations, state and non-state actors should not conduct or knowingly allow activity that intentionally and substantially damages the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet and therefore the stability of cyberspace. Let's unpack that. Without prejudice to their rights and obligations. So taking into account international law and international humanitarian law. Every international lawyer who sees that words understands that. State and non-state actors, so it's not only the state, but it's also the non-state actors that should keep their hands off, should not conduct or knowingly allow. So you don't do it, and if you know it happens, you actually intervene, that's the word, yes. Intentionally and substantially damages. Substantiality is important here. Substantially damages. In international law, in conflicts, there's always the thing about proportionality. Taking out one router on the internet is not substantial and might be very valid in military operation. Taking out the internet connectivity for a complete region, or maybe even of a complete country, is beyond this norm. Damages the general availability and integrity of the public core of the internet. What is this public core thing? We use this neodualism, I always have a hard time pronouncing that word, neodualism, to make sure there is no confusion with critical infrastructure. Because critical infrastructure is well understood by nation states and people who work there. And therefore the stability of cyberspace. So this says, don't mess with the public core. Unless you really know what you're doing as a state, so to speak. Elements of the public core include, inter alia, internet routing, domain name systems, certificates and trust, and communication cables, which have been further defined in the definition of the public core to which this norm applies. We felt that a little bit more exegesis was needed on this public core thing. So, as the technical community members, Bill Woodcock mainly, we did a survey around some network operator lists and operational communities, and basically came up with what makes out the public core, where to basically a definition question. And that definition question was basically based on a popularity contest, so to speak. So we basically said, well, this is what we include and this is what we don't. But obviously the public core as such is a somewhat loosely defined term. And that's okay in international law. Some loosely defined term is okay. Anyway, I won't read this out, but you get the gist. You know, routers, equipment, facilities, but also the standardization processes that are used to build these things. Naming and numbering systems, well, RRRs, you know, you don't want to muck about with naming. Cryptography mechanisms. So this norm would actually rule out messing about with the parameters of elliptic curves that were standardized a few years ago. It's fairly clear that a couple of years ago in the standardization process of elliptic curves, some weak numbers were introduced by some parties. That would be against this norm, because it definitely destabilizes the public core at scale. And then there's physical transmission media. So the point of this is, a point that I'm trying to make with this is, that at a very high level, we're discussing norms to create a more stable cyber environment. And having the people that do the technology in the room, you get stronger language and you bridge this high-level concepts that are about interstate behavior to the communities that actually need to do the work. So this becomes meaningful. And my question to this room is, if you have government contacts, talk to them, make them adapt this norm. I think this is a good thing for the internet. It should be the norm that we don't mess with the public core, that we keep that availability present.
No, my question is, I don't know whether
That's your phone.
my question is, when the internet started in 1969, 70s, it was told that the transmission of the internet will survive even in the nuclear holocaust and all those kind of things. So now today we are discussing that, the core of the internet needs to be safeguarded against all kinds of, perpetrators and other kind of criminals. So how does the two match, Is it internet not to be strong enough to deal with this kind of thing?
So, let me answer that by giving you part of my history in the internet. I used to work at RIPE-NCC. RIPE-NCC operated krootserver.net. My boss at the time, Daniel Karenberg, said, Olaf, I have a job for you. You have to work with these guys at the Nelnet Labs because we want to have a completely different implementation of a name server. All the name servers out there run a version of bind or software that was forked out of bind. One version of a name server implementation. No diversity. This means that if there is a bug in the software which is exploited, you can bring down the whole name server system. And mind you, I have found bugs by which I could turn off name servers. What we did at the Nelnet Labs, together with the Nelnet Labs when I was still at RIPE, and later I did when I became the director of the Nelnet Labs, was building NSD. And our philosophy was then, we don't pretend to write bug-free software, but we do pretend to write different bugs than bind does. So that you have this biological diversity, and if there's a bug in one of the systems, you don't bring down the whole thing. Now, I think that it is not unlikely that given the amount of diversity in our systems, in terms of operating systems, in terms of implementations of routing software, in terms of implementations of all these different types of things, we have fragilities that are fairly fundamental. And that if those fragilities are exploited, you can bring down huge swaths of the internet. Maybe with one or two vulnerabilities. Or even with process, or backdoors in code, introducing backdoors in codes or standards. So I do think, and I really think that there is a lot of redundancy and scalability and resiliency in the internet. Still, it's been designed that way, it works that way, and the internet is perfectly capable to route around problems. But if somebody really wants, I think you can create great havoc on the internet. So that's my personal opinion, and yeah, that's sort of, I think that is clearly a thing that I also fear. And so it's even if it's not possible, I do think it's possible. It's good to understand that if you would have a tool that would bring down the public core of the internet, that is against all norms that we commonly agree on. This is not something that you should do. Norms are about, what we commonly expect. Anyway, That's the high level. The high level. But mind you that I just said, that story that I just told about bugs in implementations goes all the way to the other side of this equation. It goes back to how do you protect the basic infrastructure? How do you protect our phones, the software that we use, the light bulbs that we use from vulnerabilities? If it were the case that we wouldn't have any bugs and everything would be perfectly secure, we probably wouldn't need those norms. But the world is not that perfect, so you have to work on both sides of the equations. And you also have to set the environment such that people who do this work can do their work in a healthy way and in a good way. But this is also something that I deeply care about. One of the other pieces of this puzzle, which the Commission is working on, we've just had a meeting in Singapore about 3 weeks ago, and after Singapore we'll bring out 5 new calls for norms or proposed norms. One of those norms is that every nation state should have a vulnerability equities process. Who does know what a vulnerabilities equities process is? That's almost nobody. This norm doesn't mean anything for you. A vulnerabilities equities. So this is about militarization of bugs. Yeah. What do we think is acceptable behavior there? If a bug is found in software, a zero day, a bug that is not usually known before, a failure, usually these bugs can be exploited in some way. Sometimes to get critical access or key access to the functionality of the device on which the software is running. And usually those bugs are stepping stones to install malware or to do other things. Installing malware is something that could be very interesting for defensive operations or for law enforcement. Because with an internet that is more and more encrypted, where do you get the information? Well, at the endpoints. That's the best way to get the information from, and sometimes you probably need to break into these systems. What is good for society, I think, is that if a bug is found, it's reported in a coordinated fashion by the security researcher who finds the bug to the producer of the software, so that the bug can be fixed and rolled out securely. That is good security, increases the security for everybody else, because if the bug is found by a hacker or sold in the hacker's market, then it might be used to create malware and ransomware and what have you. However, states have dual interests here. States can use this bug for offensive or law enforcement purposes, or they can give it in terms of the mutual interest, the common interest to the producer of the software, so that the bug is solved. A vulnerability equities process is a process whereby a nation state documents how they deal with these cases, what their trade-offs are, so that they make conscious decisions every time that such a bug is reported or found within the government information systems. You would like to do that. What you want to do is you want to make sure that every government has had a transparent process, preferably to me multi-stakeholder, but we don't talk about that in the norm, about how do we as a society come to a resolution about in which cases do we report and which cases do we keep this for our own defense, military, law enforcement purposes. And the Commission basically says you should create such a vulnerability equities process. That doesn't mean that for every bug that comes in you are transparent. In fact, you are not. But what you do is you make sure that the process by which you do these assessments are publicly. You should err on the side of being reporting. Huh? So again, this is where InfoSec, where computer security and the understanding of, this is the computer security is the domain of 0 days and buffer overflows and so on and so forth, where it immediately hits the world of cybersecurity, of government into government. This is where the two sides of this whole sort of come together. Still, we need to make sure that in every corner of our IT society, we have the capabilities to deal with these InfoSec problems, that we have people that understand what a buffer flow is and can actually fix them, that understand what security properties are, that create mindsets, that have the capacity to do this type of things, that can create security standards. Open or closed, I actually don't mind. I prefer them to work on their security standards in, say, the ITF or the W3C, or perhaps together with a bunch of people on a blockchain application. But we need those capacities too. This is where I think the Internet Society also helps, we as a community help, to bring these difficult computer vulnerability problems and their impact to society on the table. IoT is a perfect example of that. IoT, the fundamental problem of IoT devices is that IoT devices are basically classical devices produced by classical companies that are now suddenly IT companies. And there are suddenly IT companies that do not have age-long or decades-long experience and hence a cybersecurity mindset. A cybersecurity mindset is a specific mindset. It's a very paranoid mindset. You start to think about all the corner cases and everything that can go wrong, and you try to understand what if somebody actually, opens that door from the other side, or maybe lifts out the panel. Does that lock still work? You start to look with a different mind frame. And if you've been in the business of building light bulbs, you've perhaps never thought about the fact that this light bulb is now connected to the internet, and that the threat factor is not only the person who can disconnect the light bulb standing on a ladder, which is, high investment for a light bulb, but it can be somebody at the other side of the planet sitting behind a terminal. So, it is that realization, that mindset, that we need to collectively change. And that's a heavy lift. That needs A, capacity building both in the forms of tool sets, in the form of experience, in the form of experts that actually have this mindset, train these people with this mindset. It also means setting up a set of principles so that everybody actually knows what needs to be done, that they know what to pay attention to. So that a company that was in the business of producing microphones, traditionally all nicely wired, and even this is probably just a radio thing, not an internet thing. But as soon as this becomes IP aware, that sure knows what the issues are when you make these things connected to the internet. That it means that you have to have software upgradability. That it means that if you record voice and you store it in some cloud backend system, that you have responsibilities for the data lifetime. That upgradability I already talked about, huh? Yeah. That you have privacy issues and so on and so forth. I'm not going to talk a lot about the OTA framework here. The OTA framework is something that we use at the Online Trust Alliance IoT framework. Look it up if you want to. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because that is one of the mechanisms by which we say these are principles that we want people who produce consumer IoT to abide by. creating awareness, creating a sense of responsibility. And that comes back to something that I think I said before, and then I'm going to stop and go for questions. I think I'm more or less on the hour. That if you look at internet security or cyber security, I think that is not one thing. Cybersecurity is a set of conversations and of actions, most important actions, to create a more secure world. Those actions can be best taken by the people who do the actual work. Security practitioners, the people who make internet-connected microphones, the people who operate networks. The vision, however, can be set at a higher level. The big problems the vision can be sketched out at that higher level. But I think that it is very important that you have a sense of subsidiarity. That the problems around cybersecurity are addressed by communities. Communities that organize themselves around a certain technology. Like there's a whole DNS crowd out there now looking at the DNSSEC key rollover, which is none of anybody's interest really for most of the time. But there is a core of people that are really interested in following that discussion and following the developments there, which are actually pretty, the next few hours are pretty interesting actually. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will explain later. So clustering around specialities, but also clustering within your country or within your region. And that's why I think that that map of the IGFs, for instance, where pieces of these puzzles are picked up on a scale that is more human than the global IGF, are of vital importance to actually solve our problems. The people who have to solve the problems are on the floor. They should meet each other, close to each other. In the end, what we do is human work. I hope I painted a picture and provided a little bit of inspiration about the high-level discussions of cyber stability, all the way to the low-level discussions of making a network more secure and making the devices that connect to that network more secure. And that this language comes with certain words, proportionality and international law and what have you. This language comes with a set of words like distributed hash tables, elliptic curve cryptography, and that the people who speak those words don't understand those words, and the people who speak these words don't understand those words. And that it is of vital importance that we have people that make that bridge. And I hope that the people in this room will take the energy that is needed to talk to each other, so that the people who raise their hands can help you, and you can help the people who raised their hands earlier. Thank you very much. There's a few questions. Yeah, I'll take the lady first, because it's been a bit of a mammal, this.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Nandita Kaushal. I'm from academia. So my question largely is that a probable reason for proliferation of crimes, cyber crimes, is largely, according to my knowledge, is the inability to fix the responsibility or the difficulty in fixing the responsibility on the perpetrator or the culprit. And be it, personal frauds as is like credit card frauds, to something as global and fatal as blue whale challenge. So in this way, in this sense, how do you see the legal framework and internet evolving to tackle the challenges, especially now as the machines have started communicating with each other, in case they commit some crime? So how will you fix the responsibility there? Like, who will be liable there?
I think this is the most difficult question that I've been asked in a long, long time. I'm not going to answer that question, because the answer to that question is actually ours to give. It's not my answer to that question, it's ours to give. I am not a law specialist. I cannot speak about the liability around the actions of a machine based on the algorithm and the training of the algorithm and what have you. And I don't think that currently the specialists in law actually know how to give that answer. So that's a debate that we all have to put our minds to and have to engage with each other, find the people in this room who know something about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And what does that mean in terms of the will and conscious decision making? And you probably want to bring in some ethical people that are specialized on ethics to answer that question. On the other side of that equation, you said, you know, it's hard to get to perpetrators. How do we attribute things? One of the discussions that we had around nation-state behavior in cyberspace is that attribution is actually very, 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 very difficult. It's not only difficult in cyberspace, by the way. I don't know if anybody remembers this big passenger plane being shot down above the Ukraine.
Yes.
It took years to actually, for people to actually attribute that to Russia. But that was a very careful process with lots of evidence gathering, lots of intelligence around it. So not only hard evidence, but also soft evidence, in order for the Dutch state at least to feel confident that they could attribute that to Russia. I have found myself being much more careful to attribute, because attribution is such a difficult topic. Specifically interstate relationship, it can be false flag false flag actions. Like one of I'm on a row now. One of the things that was in the news last week was was reported by Bloomberg, and there has been some dispute in the tech community, in the blog sphere about that report. But they reported that there were implants, microchips implants on super micro motherboards, with the idea that those would be implants made somewhere in the production chain and delivery chain in order to create backdoors for attacks. You hear that I'm very careful not to use the word China in here. Because that is exactly the type of dispute that you now see in the blogosphere, and I have never seen such a thing. I do not know. This is not my expertise. And if you hear the specialists, there is a lot of speculation about perhaps this is even a false flag type of incident. So I'm not going to give any judgment about that story. And this is about attribution, about reality. And if this were the case, if this would really happen, it would violate one of the norms that we are publishing out of Singapore, the no taint norm. Thou shalt not taint the production and delivery of products, of mass scale products. The attribution, however, is incredibly difficult. On that same topic, and then I get back to you. One of the things that Microsoft has proposed in this, in their whole, Microsoft participates heavily in this type of discussion. Cyber stability, role of nation states, role of the public sector in this. They are at the foundation of the Tech Accord, which basically says, as tech sector, we have some responsibilities towards cybersecurity. I am very supportive of that. Personally, I'm very supportive of that action. I think it means a lot. It basically says, okay, nation states, you have to get your act together, but we'll make sure as an industry that we also do our bit to make the internet secure, and that's exactly what needs to happen. Part of that discussion is that Microsoft has proposed to set up a technical attribution center. And they're very careful to have said this is a technical attribution center, because we cannot attribute any further than technical. We cannot give the motivation behind that. And if you talk to, intelligence people, they say you can never attribute without having the backup intelligence data that ties everything together and gives you also the motivation. So it's a fascinating area, by the way. You had a question. I'm looking at, do we have time?
Yeah, for this question.
Okay.
Yeah, so this question was in a way linked to the implant story. So in that sense of products getting tainted, that too at the processor or at the chip level, then in a way it sort of drives the narratives of free trade, free internet away, that countries are driven to build products themselves rather than having a global supply chain.
Yep.
So do you think that as an effect this would result in, say, having more restricted regimes, countries being forced to build such firms? For example, Trump had rejected the acquisition of a chip company within the US to protect US interests. So.
I think that the fact that this is happening, the answer to your question, will this happen, is yes. It's happening. Is that a good thing? Not for me, no. I think that it's better for the world to have open information sharing and open trade, but that's because I think in a globalist way, so to speak. So yes, the point you're making is though valid. The point is that if people muck with the things that we need to trust to do our lives with ICT, that distrust will very quickly walk, will have economic consequences, and that will be very hard to restore. Again, on the other hand, it's sometimes very difficult to do the attribution correctly, and obviously there's a bunch of politics underneath those decisions. So yeah, I think it's very important that norms like no taint and a common understanding that you don't do that, so to speak, and certainly not en masse, is important. I can imagine a few circumstances where, as a targeted operation, you might want to do this. That's, again, under proportionality and international law where it's valid. And now I'm going to peel the picture, so I'm going to smile.
Which is your company for healthcare insurance?
It's not Achmea, so
Okay.
10,000 people got their accounts. Anybody else? One more? I'm having fun.
This is more of a comment rather than a question. 100% security is a myth. Just like we sell insurance, you fear the other person that you will die, what will the folks back home do? So you imagine your dead body and say, okay, bye, let's buy an insurance. And like rightly said about the nation state accepting it, that's never going to happen. With regards to Russia shooting down the aircraft, there are enough evidences otherwise as well. It's a long story altogether that they have done it or not, and there are other political, strategic, military interest groups in the West who are exceptionally good with information warfare or psychological ops on the web. So with regards to the global consensus part that you showed, I was looking at the list and a lot of them are either Europeans or Americans, and there is one Chinese and one Russian. So it's not equally represented at one. They are technically very good. However, these states also practice certain strategic affair operations in the world of internet, and one of those nation states is actually involved in IP theft in a very, very big way. So it's highly complicated, and I don't know how it's solved.
I think you're absolutely correct. First, 100% security is not achievable anywhere. But this is about trust. And trust is about walking in the street and having a sense of safety and security. That's sort of what I see as trust. With respect to this nation state that you mentioned two nation states. I'm not going to name names because that's not relevant. But you mentioned two nation states in a way that you said this is behavior outside of the norm. IP theft is outside of the norm, and so at least outside of your norm. Yeah? So what I think what we're trying to do with these norms is saying who actually agrees with these norms. And if we've got 253 or so out of the 255 people in the UN saying yes, we agree, then perhaps that norm carries a little bit of weight. And perhaps then, when these norms are violated, it's not frowned upon if you say, we're going to withdraw your diplomats, or we're going to impose economic sanctions, or we have another retaliation.
A small interjection there.
Yep.
So if something of that sort happens, like you rightly mentioned, however, attribution is still difficult.
It's still difficult.
China can always say, I was never there,
Yep.
which India is experiencing with some other small state in our neighborhood. They never say that they did anything ever.
Yep.
So there are bomb blasts and people dying. So how do we prove that, yes, there is a pattern, there is a signature, we have reverse engineered, investigated it, but there's a specific country saying we have nothing to do with that?
That's incredibly hard, and it might take years and years and years. People are throwing Novichok around in civilian neighborhoods in the UK, and there's a nation state that says, we didn't do it. Yeah, give us proof. And of course, that's incredibly hard. But there is a level of proof that is understood in the international environment to be sufficient. What I understand from international lawyers is proof never has to be 100%. It needs to be convincingly. I'm not an international lawyer, so I couldn't tell you. The point is that we first need to agree that spraying around Novichok in civilian neighborhoods is against the norm. Then the attribution is the second stage. We first have to agree this is out of bounds. And that's what we're trying to do with the Commission. We're trying to establish this is out of bounds. This is something that we don't want. Thank you.
Thank you very much.